my favorite chapters. Wait, no, this is not the one that's one of my favorite. It's the one that comes after this one. Um. Okay. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it and do it. Okay. So this chapter is told from the point of view. It says Eddard, so Ned. Um, and yeah, let's begin. The visitor, the visitors poured through the castle gates in a river of gold and silver and polished steel. 300 strong, a pride of bannermen and knights, of swords and free riders. Over their heads, a dozen golden banners whipped back and forth in the northern wind, emblazoned with the crowned stag of Baratheon. Ned knew many of the riders. There came Sir Jaime Lannister, with hair as bright as beaten gold, and there Sandor Clegane, with his terrible burned face. The tall boy beside him could only be the Crown Prince, and that stunned little man behind them was surely the imp, Tyrion Lannister. Yet the huge man at the head of the column, flanked by two knights in the snow-white cloaks of the knights of the King's Guard, seemed almost a stranger to Ned, until he bolted off the back of his war horse with a familiar roar and crushed him with a bone-crushing hug. Ned! Ah, but it's good to see that frozen face of yours. The king looked him over top to bottom and laughed. You have not changed at all. Would that Ned had been able to say the same. 15 years passed when they had ridden forth to win a throne. The Lord of Storm's End had been a clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and muscled, I'm sorry, had been clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and muscled like a maiden's fantasy. 6.5 feet tall, he towered over lesser men, and when he donned his armor and the great antlered helm of his house, he became veritable giant. He'd had a giant's strength too. His weapon of choice, a spiked iron warhammer that Ned could scarcely lift. In those days, the smell of leather and blood had clung to him like perfume. Now it was perfume that clung to him like perfume. And he had a girth to match his height. Ned had last seen the king 9 years before, during Balon Greyjoy's rebellion, when the stag and the dire wolf had joined to in the pretensions of the self-proclaimed king of the Iron Islands. Since the night they had stood side by side in Greyjoy's fallen stronghold, where Robert had accepted the rebel lord's surrender, and Ned had taken his son Theon as hostage and ward. The king had gained at least 8 stone. A beard as coarse and black as iron wire covered his jaw to hide his double chin and the sag of the royal jowls, but nothing could hide his stomach or the dark silk circles under his eyes. Okay, so here they mention the Iron Islands. Just so for anyone who wants to know, the Iron Islands are these. Here in the map, you can see if you go over to the north on the western part, there's these little islands. There, you can also see them in the south map, but they're on the top of that on the south part of the map. Again, in the west, you can see some islands, west of Westeros, in that part where it becomes kind of narrow. That's the narrow part is the neck, and those are the Iron Islands, to the west. And then you can also see an island also the west, further north, that's Bear Isle, or Bear Island. I don't remember which one. But, okay, just so you have a good idea of what they're talking about. Okay, let's continue. Yet Robert was Ned's king now, and not just a friend. So he said only, "Your Grace, Winterfell is yours." By then the others were dismounting as well, and grooms were coming forward from their mounts. Robert's queen, Cersei Lannister, entered on foot with her younger children. The wheelhouse in which they had ridden, A huge double decked carriage of oiled oak and gilded metal, pulled by 40 heavy draft horses, was too wide to pass through the castle gate. Ned knelt in the snow to kiss the queen's ring, while Robert embraced Catelyn like a long lost sister. Then the children had been brought forward, introduced, and approved of by both sides. No sooner had those formalities of greeting been completed than the king had said to his host, "Take me down to your I'm sorry, I'm trying to do voices. I don't think I'm very good, but I'm gonna try anyway. Um, Take me down to your crib, Eddard. I would pay my respects." Ned loved him for that, for remembering her still after all these years. He called for a lantern. No other words were needed. The queen had begun to protest. They had been riding since dawn. Everyone was tired and cold. Surely they should refresh themselves first. The dead would wait. She had said no more than that. Robert had looked at her, and her twin brother Jamie had taken her quietly by the arm, and she had said no more. They went down to the crypt together. Ned and this king he scarcely recognized. The widening stone steps were narrow. No, the winding stone steps were narrow. Ned went first with the lantern. I was starting to, th- I was starting to think we would never reach. No, I'm sorry. I was starting to think we would never reach Winterfell. Robert complained as they descended. In the south, the way they talk about my 7 kingdoms, forgets that your part is as big as the other 6 combined. I trust you enjoyed the journey, Your Grace? Robert snorted. Bogs and forests and fields, and scarcely a decent inn north of the neck. I've never seen such vast emptiness. Where are your people? Likely they were too shy to come out, Ned jested. He could feel the chill coming up the stairs, a cold breath from deep within the earth. The earth. Kings are a rare sight in the north. Robert snorted. More likely they were hiding under the snow. Snow, Ned! The kid put one hand on the wall to steady himself as they descended. L- Late summer snows are common enough, Ned said. I hope they did not trouble you. They are usually mild. The others take your mild snows, Robert swore. What will this place be like in winter? I shudder to think. The winters are hard, Ned admitted, but the Starks will endure. We always have. You need to come south, Robert told him. You need a taste of summer before it flees. In Highgarden, there are fields of golden roses that stretch away as far as the eye can see. The fruits are so ripe they explode in your mouth. Melons, peaches, fire plums. You've never tasted such sweetness. You'll see. I brought you some. Even at Storm's End, with that good wind of the bay, the days are so hot you can barely move. You ought to see the towns, Ned. Flowers everywhere. Markets burst, markets bursting with food. Summer wine so cheap and so good that you can get drunk just by breathing the air. Everyone is fat and drunk and rich. He laughed and slapped his own ample stomach a thump. And the girls, Ned, he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. I swear, women lose all modesty in the heat. They swim naked in the river, right beneath the castle, even in the streets. It's too damn hot for wool or fur, so they go around in these short gowns. Silk if they have the silver, and cotton if not. But it's all the same when they start sweating and the cloth sticks to their skin. They might as well be naked. The king laughed happily. Robert Baratheon had always been a man of huge appetites, a man who knew how to take his pleasures. That was not a charge anyone could lay at the door of Eddard Stark. Yet Ned could not help but notice that those pleasures were taking a toll on the king. Robert was breathing heavily by the time they reached the bottom of the stairs, his face red in the lantern light as they stepped out into the darkness of the crypt. Your Grace, Ned said respectfully. He swept the lantern in a wide semicircle. Shadows moved and lurked, flickering light touched the stones underfoot and brushed against a long procession of pillars that marched ahead, two by two, into the dark. Between the pillars, the dead sat on their stone thrones against the walls, back against the sepulchres that contained their mortal remains. She's at the end, with Father and Brandon. He led the way between the pillars, and Robert followed, wordlessly, shivering in the subterranean chill. It was always cold down here. Their footsteps rang over the stones and echoed in the vault overhead as they walked among the dead of House Stark. The Lords of Winter watched them pass. Their likenesses were carved into the stones that sealed the tombs. In the rows they sat, blind eyes staring out into eternal darkness, while great stone direwolves curled around their feet. The shifting shadows made the stone figures seem so steer as the living passed by. Seemed to steer as the living passed by. By ancient custom, an iron longsword had been laid across the lap of each who had been Lord of Winterfell, to keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. The oldest, the oldest had long ago rusted away to nothing, leaving only a few red stains where the metal had rested on stone. Ned wondered if that meant those ghosts were free to roam the castle now. He hoped not. The first lords of Winterfell had been men as hard as the land they ruled. In the centuries before the Dragon Lords came over the sea, they had sworn allegiance to no man, styling themselves kings in the north. Ned stopped at last and lifted the oil lantern. The crypt continued into darkness ahead of them, but beyond this point, the tombs were empty and unsealed. Black holes waiting for their dead, waiting for him and his children. Ned did not like to think on that. Here, he told his king. Robert nodded silently, knelt, and bowed his head. There were three tombs, side by side. Lord Rickard Stark, Ned's father, had a long, stern face. The stonemason had known him well. He sat with quiet dignity, stone fingers holding tight to the sword across his lap. But in life, all swords had failed him. In two smaller sepulchres on either side were his children. Brandon had been 20 when he died, strangled by order of the Mad King Aerys Targaryen only a few short days before he was to wed Catelyn Tully of Riverrun. His father had been forced to watch him die. He was the true heir, the eldest, born to rule. Lyanna had only been 16, a child woman of surpassing loveliness. Ned had loved her with all his heart. Robert had loved her even more. She was to have been his bride. She, she was more beautiful than that, the king said after a silence. His eyes lingered on Lyanna's face, as if he could will her back to life. Finally he rose, made awkward by his weight. Ah, damn it, Ned. Did you have to bury her in a place like this? His voice was hoarse with remembered grief. She deserved more than darkness. She was a Stark of Winterfell, Ned said quietly. This is her place. She should be on a hill somewhere, under a fruit tree, with the sun and clouds above her and the rain to wash her clean. I was with her when she died, Ned reminded the king. She wanted to come home, to rest beside Brandon and father. He could hear her still at times. Promise me, she had cried in a room that smelled of blood and roses. Promise me, Ned. The fever had taken her strength, and her voice had been faint as a whisper. But when he gave her his word, the fear had gone out of his sister's eyes. Ned remembered the way she had smiled then, how tightly her fingers had clutched his as she gave up her last hold on life. The rose petals spilling from her palm, dead and black. After that, he remembered nothing. They had found him still holding her body, silent with grief. The little Crannoch man, Howland Reed, had taken her hand from his. Ned could recall none of it. I bring her flowers when I can, he said. Lyanna was fond of flowers. The king touched her cheek, his fingers brushing across the rough stone as gently as if it were living flesh. I vowed to kill Rhaegar for what he did to her. You did, Ned reminded him. Only once, Robert said bitterly. They had come together at the ford of the Trident while the battle crashed around them. Robert with his warhammer and his great antlered helm, the Targaryen prince armored all in black. On his breastplate was the three-headed dragon of his house, wrought all in rubies that flashed like fire in the sunlight. The waters of the Trident ran red around the hooves of their destriers as they circled and clashed again and again until at last a crushing blow from Robert's hammer stove in the dragon and the chest beneath it. When Ned had finally come on the scene, Rhaegar lay dead on the stream, while men of both armies scrambled in the swirling waters for rubies knocked free of his armor. In my dreams, I kill him every night, Robert admitted. 1,000 deaths will still be less than he deserves. There was nothing Ned could say to that. After a quiet, he said, We should return, Your Grace. Your wife will be waiting. The others take my wife, Robert muttered sourly. But after he started back the way they had come, his footsteps falling heavily. Oh, but he started back the way they had come, his footsteps falling heavily. And if I hear your grace once more, I'll have your head on a spike. We are more to each other than that. Had not forgotten, Ned replied quietly. When the king did not answer, he said, Tell me about John. Robert shook his head. Have never seen a man sicken so quickly. We gave a tourney on my son's name day. If you had seen John then, you would have sworn he would live forever. A fortnight later, he was dead. The sickness was like a fire in his gut. It burned right through him. He paused beside a pillar, before the tomb of a long dead Stark. I loved that old man. We both did. Ned paused a moment. Catelyn fears for her sister. Does Lysa bear her grief? How does Lysa bear her grief? Robert's mouth gave a bitter twist. Not well. In truth, he admitted. I think losing John has driven the woman mad, Ned. She has taken the boy back to the Eyrie against my wishes. I had hoped to foster him with Tywin Lannister at Castle Rock. John had no brothers, no other sons. Was I supposed to leave him to be raised by women? Ned would sooner entrust a child to a pit viper than to Lord Tywin, but he left his doubts unspoken. Some old wounds never truly heal, and they bleed again at the slightest word. The wife has lost the husband, he said carefully. Perhaps the mother feared to lose the son. The boy is very young, 6 and sickly, and Lord of the Eyrie, gods have mercy, the king swore. Lord Tywin has never taken a ward before. Lysa ought to have been honored. The Lannisters are a great and noble house. She refused to even hear of it. Then she left in the dead of night, without so much as a by your leave. Cersei was furious. He sighed deeply. The boy is my namesake. Did you know? Robert Arryn. I am sworn to protect him. How can I do that if his mother steals him away? I will take him as a ward if you wish, Ned said. Lysa should consent to that. She and Catelyn were close as girls, and she would be welcome here as well. A generous offer, my friend, the king said, but too late. Lord Tywin has already given his consent. Fostering the boy elsewhere would be a grievous affront to him. I have more concern for my nephew's welfare than I do for Lannister pride, Ned declared. That is because you do not sleep with a Lannister, Robert laughed. The sound rattling among the tombs and bouncing from the vaulted ceiling. His smile was a flash of white teeth in the thicket of that huge black beard. Ah, Ned, he said, you are still too serious. He put a massive arm around Ned's shoulders. I had planned to wait a few days to speak to you, but I see now there's no need for it. Come, walk with me. They started back down between the pillars. Blind stone eyes seemed to follow them as they passed. The king kept, the king kept his arm around Ned's shoulder. You must have wondered why I finally came north to Winterfell after so long. Ned had his suspicions, but he did not give them voice. For the joy of my company, surely, he said lightly. There is the wall. You need to see it, your grace. To walk along its battlements, talk to those who man it. The Night's Watch is a shadow of what it once was. Vengeance says. No doubt, I will hear what your brother says soon enough, Robert said. The wall has stood for what, 8,000 years? It can, it can keep a few days more. I have more pressing concerns. There are, these are difficult times. I know good men about me, men like Jon Arryn. He served as Lord of the Eyrie, as Warden of the East, as Hand of the King. He will not be easy to replace. His son, Ned began. His son will succeed to the Eyrie and all its incomes, Robert said brusquely. No more. That took Ned by surprise. He stopped, startled, and turned to look at his king. The words came unbidden. The Aaron, the Aryans have always been wardens of the East. The title goes with that domain. Perhaps when he comes of age, the honor can be restored to him, Robert said. I have this year to think of it, and the next. A 6-year old boy is no war leader, Ned. In peace, the title is only an honor. Let the boy keep it. Oh, in peace, the title is only an honor. Let the boy keep it, for his father's sake, if not his own. Surely you owe Jon that much for his service. The king was not pleased. He took his arm from around Ned's shoulder. Jon's service was the duty he owed his liege lord. I am not ungrateful, Ned. You of all men ought to know that. But the son is not the father, and a mere boy cannot hold the East. Then his tone softened. Enough of this. There is a more important office to discuss, and I would not argue with you. Ned. Robert grasped Ned by the elbow. I have need of you, Ned. I am yours to command, your grace, always. They were words he had to say, so he said them, apprehensive about what might come next. Robert scarcely seemed to hear him. Those years we spent in the Eyrie. Gods, those were good years. I want you at my side again, Ned. I want you down in King's Landing, not up here at the end of the world, where you're no damned use to anybody. Robert looked off into the darkness. For a moment, as melancholy, as melancholic as a Stark. I swear to you, sitting a throne is 1,000 times harder than winning one. Laws are tedious business, and counting coppers is worse. And the people, there is no end to them. I sit on that damnable iron chair and listen to them complain until my mind is numb and my ass is raw. They all want something, money or land or justice. The lies they tell, and my lords and ladies are no better. I am surrounded by flatterers and fools. It can drive a man to madness, Ned. Half of them don't dare tell me the truth, and the other half can't find it. There are nights I wish we had lost at the Trident. Ah, not truly. But I understand, Ned said softly. Robert looked at him. I think you do. If so, you are the only one, my old friend. He smiled. Lord Eddard Stark, I would name you Hand of the King. Ned dropped to one knee. The offer did not surprise him. What other reason could Robert have had for coming so far? The Hand of the King was the second most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms. He spoke with the king's voice, commanded the king's armies, drafted the king's laws. At times, he even sat upon the Iron Throne to dispense the king's justice. when the king was absent or sick or otherwise indisposed. Robert was offering him a responsibility as large as the realm itself. It was the last thing in the world he wanted. Your Grace, he said, I am not worthy of the honor. Robert groaned with good humored impatience. If I wanted to honor you, I'd let you retire. I'm planning to make you run the kingdom and fight the wars while I eat and drink and wench myself into an early grave. He slapped his gut and grinned. You know the saying about the king and his hand? Ned knew the saying. What the king dreams, he said, the hand builds. I betted a fish made once who told me the lowborn have a choicer way to put it. The king eats, they say, and the hand takes the shit. He threw back his head and roared with his laughter. The echoes rang through the darkness, and all around them, the dead of Winterfell seemed to watch with cold and disapproving eyes. Finally, the laughter dwindled and stopped. Ned was still on one knee, his eyes upraised. Damn it, Ned, the king complained. You might at least humor me with a smile. They say it grows so cold up in the winter that a man's laughter freezes in his throat and chokes him to death, Ned said evenly. Perhaps that is why the Starks have so little humor. Come south with me, and I'll teach you how to laugh again, the king promised. You helped me win this damnable throne, now help me hold it. We were meant to rule together. If Lyanna had lived, we should have been brothers, bound by blood as well as affection. Well, it is not too late. I have a son, you have a daughter. My Joff and your Sansa shall join our houses, as Lyanna and I might once have done. This offer did surprise him. Sansa is only 11. Robert waved an impatient hand. Old enough for betrothal. The marriage can wait a few years, the king smiled. Now stand up and say yes, curse you. Nothing would give me greater pleasure, your grace, Ned answered. He hesitated. These honors are also unexpected. May I have some time to consider? I need to tell my wife. Yes, of course. Tell Catelyn. Sleep on it if you must. The king reached down, clasped Ned by the hand, and pulled him roughly to his feet. Just don't keep me waiting too long. I am not the most patient of men. For a moment, Eddard Stark was filled with a terrible sense of foreboding. This was his place, here in the north. He looked at the stone figures all around them, breathed deep in the chill silence of the crypt. He could feel the eyes of the dead. They were all listening, he knew, and winter was coming. Okay, so that's the first of the chapters we have for today. Really good one. I really like Ned's chapters. I really like Ned as a character in general, you know. And yeah, I really like the way that it's written. I really like the way that the author, you know, the George R. Martin, you know, uses his words. I like how he says that it looks as if, you know, as if the you know, the old Lords of Winter were looking with disapproving eyes, you know. Yeah, I don't know. Like he could feel the eyes of the dead and all of that, and I don't remember where he all around the dead, uh darkness all around them, the dead of Winterfell seemed to watch with cold and disapproving eyes. Yeah, I really like that line. It not only tells us what Ned is thinking, you know, because this is his POV, but in general it tells us, like, you know, it's proving eyes of like what, like the idea of going, you know, south. Probably Ned doesn't want to. You know, he lives in the north. That's where he feels he belongs. Um, Disapproving of the way that Robert acts since he's the king. Maybe. I mean, we see that Ned thinks that the king that like you can tell that he cares about Robert, but you know, maybe he doesn't think like, oh, this is how you act as a king. So yeah, I really like this chapter in general. It gives us a lot of insight into both characters actually. You know, and the relationship that they have and their past. We see a little bit of the we hear a little bit of the Battle of the Trident, when Robert took his warhammer and like smashed in the chest plate and the chest of the previous king, of the previous prince. And people were like, and rubies fell out of his armor, and people were like shoveling in the river, like shoving each other, trying to get the rubies. They actually they actually stopped fighting both sides, and they just tried to get like the who knows how much money that was. Um, and yeah, you know, you also know that that prince did something to Ned's sister, and that she asked him to promise something. So yeah, lots of important and of cool things here. Lots of backstory, lots of world building. I love it. I love it. So let's continue with, again, this is one now. This one that comes next is one of my favorite chapters. Um, in the books. Well, in the at least in the first book. You know, mainly because of a conversation towards the end of the chapter. So okay, so let's begin. This one is from the perspective of Jon. Remember Jon Snow, Ned's bastard son. Uh, okay. There were times, not many, but a few, when Jon Snow was glad he was a bastard. As he filled his wine cup once more from a passing flagon, it struck him that this might be one of them. He settled back in his place on the bench among the younger squires and drank. The sweet, fruity taste of summer wine filled his mouth and brought a smile to his lips. The great hall of Winterfell was hazy with smoke and heavy with the smell of roasted meat and fresh baked bread. Its grey stone walls were draped with banners, white, gold, crimson. The dire wolf of Stark, Baratheon's crowned stag, the lion of Lannister. A singer was playing the high harp and reciting a ballad, but down at this end of the hall, his voice could scarcely be heard above the roar of the fire, the clangor of pure plates and cups, and the low mutter of 100 drunken conversations. It was the fourth hour of the welcoming feast laid for the king. Jon's brothers and sisters had been seated with the royal children beneath the raised platform where Lord and Lady Stark hosted the king and queen. In honor of the occasion, his lord father would doubtless permit each child a glass of wine, but no more than that. Down here on the benches, there was no one to stop Jon from drinking as much as he had a thirst for, and he was finding that he had a man's thirst. To the rage, to the raucous delight of the youths around him, the raucous rushes, I don't know. I'm gonna think it's raucous delight of the youths around him, who urged him on every time he drained the glass. They were fine company, and Jon relished the stories they were telling, tales of battle and betting and the hunt. He was certain that his companions were more entertaining than the king's offspring. He had seated his curiosity about the visitors when they made their entrance, when they made their entrance. The procession had passed not a foot from the place he had been given on the bench, and Jon had gotten a good long look at them all. His lord father came first, escorting the queen. She was as beautiful as men said. A jeweled tiara gleamed amidst her long golden hair, its emeralds a perfect match for the green of her eyes. His father had helped her up the steps to the dais and led her to her seat. But the queen never so much as looked at him. Even at 14, Jon could see through her smile. Next had come King Robert himself, with Lady Stark on his arm. The king was a great disappointment to Jon. His father had talked of him often. The peerless Robert Baratheon, demon of the Trident, the fiercest warrior of the realm, a giant among princes. Jon saw only a fat man, red-faced under his beard, sweating through his silks. He walked like a man half in his cups. After them came the children, little Rickon first, managing the long walk with all the dignity a 3-year-old could muster. Jon had to urge him on when he stopped to visit. Close behind came Rob, in grey wool trimmed with white, the, the star colors. He had the princess. He had the princess Myrcella. Myrcella. I'm gonna pronounce it Myrcella. I don't know how it's supposed to be. Myrcella. Myrcella. Yeah, Myrcella on his arm. She was a wisp of a girl, not quite 8, her hair a cascade of golden curls under a jeweled net. Joan noticed the shy looks she gave Rob as they passed between the tables and the timid way she smiled at him. He decided she was insipid. Rob didn't even have the sense to realize how stupid she was. He was grinning like a fool. His half sisters escorted the royal princess. Arya was paired with plump young Tommen, those white blonde, whose white blonde hair was longer than hers. Sansa, 2 years older, drew the crown prince, Joffrey Baratheon. He was 12, younger than Jon or Robb, but taller than either. To Jon's vast dismay, Prince Joffrey had his sister's hair and his mother's deep green eyes. A thick tangle of blonde curls dripped down past his golden choker and high velvet collar. Sansa looked radiant as she walked beside him, but Jon did not like Joffrey's pouty lips or the bored, disdainful way he looked at Winterfell's great hall. He was more interested in the pair that came behind him, the Queen's brothers, the Lannisters of Castle Rock, the Lion and the Imp. There was no mistaking which was which. Sir Jaime Lannister was twin to Queen Cersei, tall and golden, with flashing green eyes and a smile that cut like a knife. He wore crimson silk, high black boots, a black satin cloak. On the breast of his tunic, the lion of his house was embroidered in gold thread, roaring its defiance. They called him the Lion of Lannister to his face and whispered, Kingslayer, behind his back. Jon found it hard to look away from him. This is what a king should look like, he thought to himself as the man passed. Then he saw the other one, waddling along half hidden by his brother's side, Tyrion Lannister, the youngest of Lord Tywin's brood and by far the ugliest. All that the gods had given to Cersei and Jaime, they had denied Tyrion. He was a dwarf, half his brother's height, struggling to keep pace on stunned legs. His head was too large for his body, with a brute squashed thin face beneath a swollen shelf of a brow. One green eye and one black, one peered out from under a lank fall of hair so blonde it seemed white. Jon watched him with fascination. The last of the High Lords to enter were his uncle, Benjen Stark of the Night's Watch, and his father's ward, young Theon Greyjoy. Benjen gave Jon a warm smile as he went by. Theon ignored him utterly, but there was nothing new in that. After all had been seated, toasts were made, thanks were given and returned, and then the feasting began. Jon had started drinking then, and he had not stopped. Something rubbed against his leg beneath the table. Jon saw red eyes staring up at him. Hungry again? He asked. There was still half a honeyed chicken in the center of the table. Jon reached out to tear off a leg, then had a better idea. He knifed the bird whole and let the carcass slide to the floor between his legs. Ghost ripped into it in a savage silence. His brothers and sisters had not been permitted to bring their wolves to the banquet, but there were more curs than Judd could count at this end of the hall, and no one had said a word about his pup. He told himself that he was fortunate in that too. His eyes stung. Jon rubbed at them savagely, cursing the smoke. He swallowed another gulp of wine and watched his dire wolf devour the chicken. Dogs moved between the tables, trailing after the serving girls. One of them, A black mongrel bitch with long yellow eyes caught a scent of the chicken. She stopped and edged under the bench to get a share. John watched the confrontation. The bitch growled loud in her throat and moved closer. Ghost looked up, silent, and fixed the dog with those hot red eyes. The bitch snapped an angry challenge. She was 3 times the size of the dire wolf. Ghost did not move. He stood over his prize and opened his mouth, baring his fangs. The bitch tensed, barked again, then, through better thought better of this fight, she turned and slunk away, with one last defiant snap to save her pride. Ghost went back to his meal. John grinned and reached under the table to ruffle the shaggy white fur. The direwolf looked up at him, nipped gently at I'm sorry, nipped gently at his hand, then went back to eating. Is this one of the dire wolves I've heard so much of? A familiar voice asked close at hand. John looked up happily at his uncle as his uncle Ben put a hand on his head and ruffled his hair as much as John had ruffled a wolf's. Yes, he said. His name is Ghost. One of the squires interrupted the body story. The body story he'd been telling to make room at the table for their lord's brother. Benjamin Stark straddled the bench with long legs and took the wine cup out of John's hand. Summer wine, he said, after a taste. Nothing so sweet. How many cups have you had, John? John smiled. Ben Stark laughed, as I feared. Oh, well, I believe I was younger than you the first time I got truly and sincerely drunk. He snagged a roasted onion, dripping brown with gravy from a nearby trencher, and bit into it. It crunched. His uncle was sharp-featured and gaunt as a mountain crag, but there was always a hint of laughter in his blue-gray eyes. He dressed in black, as befitted a man of the Night's Watch. Tonight it was rich black velvet, with high leather boots and a white belt with a silver buckle. A heavy silver chain was looped around his neck. Benjamin watched Ghost with amusement as he ate his onion. A very quiet wolf, he observed. He's not like the others, John said. He never makes a sound. That's why I named him Ghost. That, and because he's white. The others are all dark, gray or black. There are still dire wolves beyond the wall. We hear them on our rangings. Benjamin Stark gave John a long look. Don't you usually eat at the table with your brothers? Most times, John answered in a flat voice. But tonight, Lady Stark thought it might give insult to the royal family to sit a bastard amongst them. I see. His uncle glanced over his shoulder at the raised table at the far end of the hall. My brother does not seem very festive tonight. John had noticed that too. A bastard had to learn to notice things, to read the truth that people hid behind their eyes. His father was observing all the courtesies, but there was tightness in him that John had seldom seen before. He said little, looking out over the hall with hooded eyes, seeing nothing. 2 seats away, the king had been drinking heavily all night. His broad face was flushed behind his great black beard. He made many a toast, laughed loudly and at every jest, and attacked each dish like a starving man. But beside him, the queen seemed as cold as a nice sculpture. The queen is angry too, John told his uncle in a low, quiet voice. Father took the king down to the crypts this afternoon. The queen did not want him to go. Benjamin gave John a careful, measuring look. You don't miss much, do you, John? We could use a man like you on the wall. John swelled with pride. Rob is a stronger lance than I am, but I'm the better sword, and Holland says I sit a horse as well as anyone in the castle. Notable achievements. Take me with you when you go back to the wall, John said in a sudden rush. Father will give me leave to go if you ask him. I know he will. Uncle Benjamin studied his face carefully. The wall is a hard place for a boy, John. I'm almost a man grown, John protested. I will turn 15. Oh my god, he's younger than I remembered. Actually, no. I thought he was like. Yeah, that's about right, actually. I'm almost a man grown, he protested. I will turn 15 on my next name day. And Maester Lewin says bastards grow up faster than other children. That's true enough, Benjen said with a downward twist of his mouth. He took John's cup from the table, filled it fresh with a nearby pitcher, and drank down a long swallow. Daeron Targaryen was only 14 when he conquered Dorne, Jon said. The young dragon was one of his heroes. A conquest that lasted a summer, his uncle pointed out. Your boy king lost 10,000 men taking the place, and another 50 trying to hold it. Someone should have told him that war isn't a game. He took another sip of wine. Also, he said, wiping his mouth, Daeron Targaryen was only 18 when he died. Or have you forgotten that part? I've forgotten nothing, Jon boasted. The one was making him bold, and tried to sit very straight to make himself seem taller. I want to serve the Night's Watch, Uncle. I don't know why that's the voice I gave him, but that's the voice I gave him. He had thought of it, oh, he had thought on it long and hard, lying up at night while his brothers slept around him. Robb would someday inherit Winterfell, would command great armies as the Warden of the North. Bran and Rickon would be Robb's bannermen and rule holdfasts in his name. His sisters, Arya and Sansa, would marry the heirs of other great houses and go south as mistresses of castles of their own. But what place could a bastard hope to earn? You don't know what you're asking, John. The Night's Watch is a sworn brotherhood. We have no families. None of us will ever father sons. Our wife is duty. Our mistress is honor. A bastard can have honor too, John said. I am ready to swear you oath. You're a boy of 14, Benjen said. Not a man, not yet. Until you have known a woman, you cannot understand what you would be giving up. I don't care about that, John said hotly. You might, if you knew what it meant, Benjen said. If you knew what the oath would cost you, you might be less eager to pay the price, son. John felt anger rise inside him. I am not your son. Benjen Stark stood up. More's the pity. He put a hand on John's shoulder. Come back to me after you've fathered a few bastards of your own, and we'll see how you feel. John trembled. I will never father a bastard, he said carefully. Never. He spat it out like venom. Suddenly he realized that the table had fallen silent, and they were all looking at him. He felt the tears begin to well behind his eyes. He pushed himself to his feet. I must be excused, he said with the last of his dignity. He whirled and bolted before they could see him cry. He must have drunk more wine than he had realized. His feet got tangled under him as he tried to leave, and he lurched sideways into a serving girl and sent a flagon of spiced wine crashing to the floor. Laughter boomed all around him, and John felt hot tears on his cheeks. Someone tried to steady him. He wrenched free of their grip and ran, half blind, for the door. Ghost followed close at his heels, out into the night. The yard was quiet and empty. A lone sentry stood high on the battlements of the inner wall, his cloak pulled tight around him against the cold. He looked bored and miserable as he huddled there alone, but John would have traded places with him in an instant. Otherwise, the castle was dark and deserted. John had seen an abandoned holdfast once, a drear place where nothing moved, but the wind and the stones kept silent about whatever people had lived there. Winterfell reminded him of that tonight. The sounds of music and songs spilled through the open windows behind him. They were the last things John wanted to hear. He wiped away his tears on the sleeve of his shirt, furious that he had let them fall, and turned to go. Boy! A voice called out to him. John turned. Tyrion Lannister was sitting on the ledge above the door to the great hall, looking for all the world, looking for all the world like a gargoyle. The dwarf grinned down at him. Is that I am a wolf? A dire wolf, John said. His name is Ghost. He stared up at the little man, his disappointment suddenly forgotten. What are you doing up there? Why aren't you at the feast? Too hot, too noisy, and I drunk too much wine, Dwarf told him. I learned long ago that it's considered rude to vomit on your brother. May I have a closer look at your wolf? John hesitated, then nodded slowly. Can you climb down, or shall I bring a ladder? Oh, bleed that, the little man said. He pushed himself off the ledge into empty air. John gasped, then watched with awe as Tyrion Lannister spun around in a tight bolt, landed lightly on his hands, then bolted backwards into his legs. Ghost backed away from him uncertainly. The dwarf dusted himself off and laughed. I believe I've frightened your wolf. My apologies. He's not scared, John said. He knelt and called out, Ghost, come here. Come on. That's it. The wolf pup padded closer and nuzzled at John's face, but he kept a weary eye on Tyrion Lannister. And when the dwarf reached out to pet him, he drew back and bared his fangs in a silent snarl. Shy, isn't he? Lannister observed. Sit, Ghost, John commanded. That's it. Keep still. He looked up at the dwarf. You can touch him now. He won't move until I tell him to. I've been training him. I see, Lannister said. He ruffled the snow-white fur between Ghost's ears and said, Nice wolf. If I wasn't here, he'd tear out your throat, John said. It wasn't actually true, yet, but it would be. In that case, you had best stay close, the dwarf said. He cocked his oversized head to one side and looked John over with his mismatched eyes. I am Tyrion Lannister. I know, John said. He rose. Standing, he was taller than the dwarf. It made him feel strange. You're Ned Stark's bastard, aren't you? John felt a coldness pass right through him. He pressed his lips together and said nothing. Did I offend you? Lannister said. Sorry, dwarves don't have to be tactful. Generations of capering fools in Motley have won me the right to dress badly and say any damn thing that comes into my head, he grinned. You are the bastard, though. Lord Eddard Stark is my father, John admitted stiffly. Lannister studied his face. Yes, he said. I can see it. You have more of the north in you than your brothers. Half-brothers, John corrected. He was pleased by the dwarf's comment, but he tried not to let it show. Let me give you some counsel, bastard, Lannister said. Never forget what you are, for surely the world would not. Make it your strength, and then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you. John was in no mood for anyone's counsel. What do you know about being a bastard? All dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. You are your mother's trueborn son of Lannister. Am I? The dwarf replied, sardonic. Do tell my lord father. My mother died birthing me, and he's never been sure. I don't even know who my mother was, John said. Some woman, no doubt. Most of them are. He favored John with a rueful grin. Remember this, boy. All dwarves may be bastards, yet not all bastards need be dwarfs. And with that, he turned and sauntered back into the feast, whistling a tune. When he opened the door, the light from within threw his shadow clear across the yard, and for just a moment, Tyrion Lannister stood tall as a king. Okay, so I really, really love that conversation there at the end. That is one of my favorite, interactions in the whole book series. And I like John's character. You can see that he's in some ways pretty mature, and in others he's, not. He's still, true to his age in some ways, which makes sense. You can see that why he would grow up, like that, being a bastard and all. But it's I don't know. It's interesting. I really like the all the comparisons to the Lannisters and royalty. First of all, you have the Queen Cersei Lannister. Then you have the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, who John at the beginning of the chapter compares him to the king. It says this is what a king should look like. But then at the end, it's Tyrion who he compares as a king. Because Jaime may look like a king. He has the look, but Tyrion is the one who, for a moment, shows John, makes John think this is what a king should be like. Which to me is more important. He says that the shadow, and for a moment, Tyrion Lannister was tall as a king. And I think that's really cool. Not only is it really cool for the character of Tyrion, the more you know about him, is like, that's a really cool line. And to know that he actually had that impression on someone. But, I just like it. And, also the fact that, their animal is the lion, which is usually, the king or whatever. So yeah, I really like these kind of things that you can notice here and there. I know that John, seems to want to join the Night's Watch. The ones that are at the wall in the north map. There, you can see the wall. It's that line towards the top that that separates. That's where the Seven Kingdoms officially end. There's more land north of that, but that's as far as the Seven Kingdoms go, at least. And I really like this chapter. I really like. We get to know a lot about John. We see that his uncle Benjen is kind of really wants him to think about this joining the Night's Watch, because his uncle is a member of the Night's Watch, and he thinks you need to understand it better before you can make the decision. Which, fair enough. And John is like, no, I want it. He's sure that he already knows. Like a kid would. So yeah, no, in many ways, like I like it. In some ways he's kind of immature. In others he's not. Like he can really read people from what it seems. I like that. I really like the way all of this is set up. Yeah, he's 14, I believe. They said 14, right? 14 or 15, something like that. In this first book. No, he's 14, I believe. Because I think that by the last book, he's like 16, 17. The last book that's come out, I mean. But anyways, yeah. I really like this chapter. That conversation at the end, I think it's really cool. It's really true what Tyrion says, the insults that people give you, the shit they give you, and especially if it's for things, out of your control, that make them your pride. And, make them, like, what you, and then they're just not insulting you anymore. They're just kind of describing you instead, when they try to use them against you, and or something like that. I cannot express it very well, but that's more or less the idea, and I think it's a cool idea. I think, and I think it's very appropriate that someone like Tyrion would think like this, because he probably has had a pretty hard life just for being, just for being someone, with his physical condition. I'm not sure what the actual term is though. Um, but yeah, anyway, let's continue to the this next chapter. Let me see. Yeah, this next chapter is the last one I read in the other stream before I had to cut it short. So yeah, we're gonna read at least this one, and afterwards, I'm gonna decide if I keep going or not. Uh, I'm thinking maybe not because I'm kind of tired, and I want to rest and whatnot. And also my chair is not super comfortable, so I kind of wanna, you know, do do something else or sit somewhere else at least, uh, like in a couch or something. But you know, whatever. That's for later. So this next chapter is Catelyn. I think this is the second Catelyn chapter. You know, the wife of Ned. You know, so yeah, let's begin. Um, oops, sorry. I don't know if you heard that. I hope not. But anyways, sorry. Uh, yeah, I kind of burped. Anyways, oops, I moved the thing. Here we go. Catelyn. Of all the rooms in Winterfell's great keep, Catelyn's bedchambers were the hottest. She seldom had to light a fire. The castle had been built over natural hot springs, and the scalding waters rushed through its walls and chambers like blood through a man's body, driving the chill from the stone halls, filling the glass gardens with moist warmth, keeping the earth from freezing. Open pools smoked day and night in a dozen small courtyards. That was a little thing in summer. In winter, it was the difference between life and death. Caroline's was always hot and steamy, and her walls warm to the touch. The warmth reminded her of a river run, of days in the sun with Lysa and Edmure, but Ned could never abide the heat. The Starks were made for the cold, he would tell her, and she would laugh and tell him that the castle they had and and she would laugh and tell him that in that case they had certainly built their castle in the wrong place. So when they had finished, Ned rolled off and climbed from her bed, as he had 1,000 times before. He crossed the room, pulled back the heavy tapestries, and threw open the high, narrow windows one by one, letting the night air into the chamber. The wind swirled around him as he stood facing the dark, naked and empty handed. Catelyn pulled the furs to her chin and watched him. He looked somehow smaller and more vulnerable, like the youth she had wed in the Septak River Run, 15 long years gone. Her loins still ached from the urgency of his lovemaking. Okay. It was a good ache. She could feel his seed within her. She prayed that it might quicken there. It had been 3 years since Rickon. She was not too old. She could give him another son. I will refuse him, Ned said. He turned back to her. His eyes were haunted, his voice thick with doubt. Catelyn sat up in the bed. You cannot. You must not. My duties are here in the north. I have no wish to be Robert's hand. He will not he will not understand that. He is a king now, and kings are not like other men. If you refuse to serve him, he will wonder why, and sooner or later he will begin to suspect that you oppose him. Can't you see the danger that would put us in? Ned shook his head, refusing to believe. Robert would never harm me or mine. We're closer than brothers. He loves me. If I refuse him, he will roar and curse and bluster, and in a week we will laugh about it together. I know the man. You knew the man, she said. The king is a stranger to you. Catelyn remembered the direwolf dead in the snow, the broken antler lodged deep in her throat. She had to make him see. Pride is everything to a king. My pride is everything to a king, my lord. Robert came all this way to see you, to bring you these great honors. You cannot throw them back in his face. Honors? Ned laughed bitterly. In his eyes, yes, she said. And in yours? And in mine. She blazed, angry now. Why couldn't he see? He offers his own son in marriage to our daughter. What else would you call that? Sansa might someday be queen. Her sons could rule from the wall to the mountains of Dorne. What is wrong? What is so wrong with that? God, Scowling. Sansa's only 11, Ned said. And Joffrey is, she finished for him, crown prince, an heir to the Iron Throne. I was only 12 when my father promised me to your brother Brandon. That brought a bitter twist into Ned's mouth. Brandon, yes. Brandon would know what to do. He always did. He was all what it all was meant for Brandon. You, Winterfell, everything. He was born to be a king's hand and father to queens. I never asked for this cup to pass to me. Perhaps not, Catelyn said. But Brandon is dead and the cup has passed. You must drink from it, like it or not. Ned turned away from her, back to the night. He stood staring out in the darkness, watching the moon and the stars. Perhaps, or perhaps the sentries on the wall. Catelyn softened then to see his pain. Eddard Stark had married her in Brandon's place, as custom decreed, but the shadow of his dead brother still lay between them, as did the other, the shadow of the woman he would not name, the woman who had borne him his bastard son. She was about to go to him when the knock came at the door, loud and unexpected. Ned turned, frowning. What is it? Desmond's voice came through the door. My lord. My lord. Master Lewin is without and begs urgent audience. You told him I left orders not to be disturbed. Yes, my lord, he insists. Very well. Send him in. Ned crossed the wardrobe and slipped on a heavy robe. Catelyn realized suddenly how cold it had become. She sat up in bed and pulled the furs to her chin. Perhaps we should close the windows, she suggested. Ned nodded absently. Master Lewin was shown in. No, Maester Lewin was shown in. The Maester was a small grey man. His eyes were grey and quick, and saw much. His hair was grey, what little the years had left them. His robe was grey wool, trimmed with white fur, the stark colors. Its great floppy sleeves had pockets hidden inside. Lewin was always tucking things into those sleeves and producing other things from them. Books, messages, strange artifacts, toys for the children. With all he kept hidden in his sleeves, Catelyn was surprised that Maester Lewin could lift his arms at all. The Maester waited until the door had closed behind him before he spoke. My lord, he said to Ned, pardon for disturbing your rest. I have been left a message. Ned looked irritated. Been left? By whom? Has there been a rider? I was not told. There was no rider, my lord. Only a carved wooden box left on a table in my observatory while I napped. My servants saw no one, but it must have been brought by someone in the king's party. We have had no other visitors from the south. A wooden box, you say, Catelyn said. Inside was a fine news lens for the observatory, from Myr by the look of it. The lens crafters of Myr are without equal. Ned frowned. He had little patience for this sort of thing, Catelyn knew. A lens, he said. What has that to do with me? I asked the same question, Master Lewin said. Clearly there was more to this than the seeming. Under a heavy weight of her furs, Catelyn shivered. A lens is an instrument to help us see. Indeed it is. He fingered the collar of his order. A heavy chain was tied around the neck beneath his robe, each link forged from a different metal. Catelyn could feel dread stirring inside her once again. What is it? What is it that they would have us see more clearly? The very thing, the very thing I asked myself. Mr. Lewin drew a tightly rolled paper out of his sleeve. I found a true message concealed within a false button when I dismantled the box. The lens had come in. That when I dismantled the box, the lens had come in. But it is not for my eyes. Ned held out his hand. Let me have it then. Lewin did not stir. Pardons, my lord. The message is not for you either. It is marked for the eyes of the Lady Catelyn, and her alone. May I approach? Catelyn nodded, not trusting to speak. The maester placed the paper on the table beside the bed. It was sealed with a small blob of blue wax. Lewin bowed and began to retreat. Stay, Ned commanded him. His voice was grave. He looked at Catelyn. What is it, my lady? You're shaking. I'm afraid, she admitted. She reached out and took a letter in trembling hands. The first dropped away from her nakedness. Forgotten in the blue wax was the moon and falcon of seal, the moon and falcon seal of House Erin. It, it's from Lysa. Catelyn looked at her husband. It will not make us glad, she told him. There is grief in this message, Ned. I can feel it. Ned frowned, his face darkening. Open it. Catelyn broke the seal. Her eyes moved over the words. At first, they made no sense to her. Then she remembered. Lysa took no chances. When we were girls together, we had a private language, she and I. Can you read it? Yes, Catelyn admitted. Then tell us. Perhaps I should withdraw, Maester Lewin said. No, Catelyn said. We will need your counsel. She threw back the furs and climbed from the bed. The night air was as cold as the grave on her bare skin as she paddled across the room. Maester Lewin averted his eyes. Even Ned looked shocked. Ned looked shocked. I think I actually okay. What are you doing? He asked. Lighting a fire, Catelyn told him. She found the dressing gown and shrugged into it, then knelt over the cold hearth. Mr. Lewin, Ned began. Mr. Lewin has delivered all my children, Catelyn said. This is no time for false modesty. She slid the paper in among the kindling and placed the heavier logs on top of it. Ned crossed the room, took her by the arm, and pulled her to her feet. He held her there, his face inches from her. My lady, tell me, what was this message? Catelyn stiffened in his grasp. A warning, she said softly. If we have the wits to hear it. His eyes searched her face. Go on. Lysa says Jon Arryn was murdered. His fingers tightened on her arm. By whom? The Lannisters, she told him. The Queen. Ned released his hold on her arm. There were deep red marks on her skin. Cuts, he whispered. His voice was hoarse. Your Your sister is sick with grief. She cannot know what she's saying. She knows, Catelyn said. Lysa is impulsive, yes. But this message was carefully planned, cleverly hidden. She knew it meant meant death if her letter fell into the wrong hands. To risk so much, she must have had more than mere suspicion. Catelyn looked at her husband. Now we truly have no choice. You must be Robert's hand. You must go south with him and learn the truth. She saw at once that Ned had reached a very different conclusion. The only truths I know are here. South is a nest of adders I would do better to avoid. Lewin plucked his chain collar where it had chafed the soft skin of his throat. The hand of the king has great power, my lord. Power to find the truth about Lord Aaron's death and bring his killers to the king's justice. Power to protect Lady Erin and her son if the worst be true. Ned glanced helplessly around the bedchamber. Cadeline's heart, Cadeline's heart went out to him, but she knew she could not take him in her arms just then. First, the victory must be won, for her children's sake. You say you love Robert like a brother. Would you leave your brother surrounded by Lannisters? The others take you both, Ned muttered darkly. He turned away from them and went to the window. She did not speak, nor did the maester. They waited, quiet, while Eddard Stark said a silent farewell to the home he loved. And he turned away from the window at last. His voice was tired and full of melancholy, and moisture glittered faintly in the corners of his eyes. My father went south once to answer the summons of a king. He never came home again. A different time, Master Lewin said. A different king. Yes, Ned said dully. He seated himself in a chair by the hearth. Catelyn, you shall stay here in Winterfell. His words were like an icy draught through her heart. No, she said, suddenly afraid. Was this to be her punishment? Never to see his face again, not to feel his arms around her? Yes, Ned said, in words that would brook no argument. You must govern the north in my stead while I run Robert's errands. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell. Rob is 14. Soon enough, he will be a man grown. He must learn to rule, and I will not be here for him. Make him part of your councils. He must be ready when his time comes. God's will, not for many years, Master Lewin muttered. Maester Lewin muttered. Maester Lewin, I trust you as I would my own blood. Give my wife your voice in all things great and small. Teach my son the things he needs to know. Winter is coming. Maester Lewin nodded gravely. Then silence fell, until Catelyn found her courage and asked the question whose answer she most dreaded. What of the other children? Ned stood and took her in his arms and held her face close to his. Rickon is very young, he said gently. He should stay here with you and Rob. The others I would take with me. I could not bear it, Catelyn said, trembling. You must, he said. Sansa must wed Joffrey. That is clear now. We must give them no grounds to suspect our devotion. And it is past time Arya learned the ways of a southern court. In a few years, she will be of an age to marry too. Sansa would shine in the south, Catelyn thought to herself, and the gods knew Arya needed refinement. Reluctantly, she let go of them in her heart. But not Bran, never Bran. Yes, she said, but please, Ned, for the love you bear me, let Bran remain here at Winterfell. He is only 7. I was 8 when my father sent me to foster at the Eyrie, Ned said. Sir Roderick tells me there is a bad feeling between Robb and Prince Joffrey. That is not healthy. Bran can bridge the distance. He's a sweet boy, quick to laugh, easy to love. Let him grow up with the young princess. Let him become their friend as Robert became mine. Our house will be the safer for it. He was right, Catelyn knew. It did not make the pain any easier to bear. She would lose all four of them then, Ned and both girls, and her sweet, loving Bran. Only Rob and little Rickon would be left to her. She felt lonely already. Winterfell was such a vast place. Keep him off the walls, then, she said bravely. You know how Bran loves to climb. Ned kissed the tears from her eyes before they could fall. Thank you, my lady, he whispered. This is hard, I know. What of Jon Snow, my lord? Lewin asked. Catelyn tensed at the mention of the name. Ned felt the anger in her and pulled away. Many men fathered bastards. Catelyn had grown up with that knowledge. It came as no surprise to her in the first year of her marriage to learn that Ned had fathered a child on some girl chance met on campaign. He had a man's needs, after all, and they had spent that year apart. Ned off at war in the south while she remained safe in her father's castle at Riverrun. Her thoughts um, were more of Rob, the infant at her breast, than of the husband she scarcely knew. He was welcome to whatever solace he might find between battles, and if his seed quickened, she expected he would see to his child's needs. He did more than that. The Starks were not like other men. Ned brought his bastard home with him and called him son for all the North to see. When the wars were over at last, Catelyn rode to Winterfell. Jon and his wet nurse had already taken up residence. That cut deep. Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word. But a castle has no secrets, and Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of her husband's soldiers. They whispered of Sir Aaron. Oh no, they whispered of Sir Arthur Thane, the Sword of the Morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of Aerys Kingsguard, and of how their young lord had slain him in single combat. And they told how afterward Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. The lady Ashara Dane, tall and fair, with hunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband the truth of it, asked him to his face. That was the only time in all their years that Ned had ever frightened her. Neb, Never ask me about Jon, he said, cold as ice. He is my blood, and that is all you need to know. And now I will learn where you heard that name, my lady. She had pledged to obey, so she told him, and from that day on the whispering had stopped, and the Shara Dane's name was never heard in Winterfell again. Whoever Jon's mother had been, Ned must have loved her fiercely, for nothing Catelyn said would persuade him to send the boy away. It was one thing she could never forgive him. She had come to love her husband with all her heart, but she had never found it in her to love Jon. She might have overlooked a dozen bastards for Ned's sake, so long as they were out of sight. Jon was never out of sight, and as he grew, he looked more like Ned than any of the true-born sons she bore him. Somehow that made it worse. Jon must go, she said. She said now. He unrolled her clothes, Ned said. I had hoped he cannot stay here, Catelyn said, cutting him off. He is your son, not mine. I will not have him. It was hard, she knew, but no less the truth. Ned would do the boy no kindness by leaving him here at Winterfell. The look Ned gave her was anguished. You know I cannot take him south. There will be no place for him at a court. A boy with a bastard's name. You know what they will say of him. She will be shunned. Catelyn armored her heart against the mute appeal in her husband's eyes. They say your friend Robert has fathered a dozen bastards himself, and none of them have ever been seen at court, Ned blazed. The Lannister woman has seen to that. How can you be so damnably cruel, Catelyn? He is only a boy. His fury was on him. He might have said more and worse, but Maester Lewin cut in. Another solution presents itself, he said in his voice, quiet. Your brother Benjen came to me about John a few days ago. It seems the boy aspires to take the black. Ned looked shocked. He asked to uh, he asked to join the Night's Watch. Catelyn said nothing. Let Ned work it out in his own mind. Her voice would not be welcome now, yet gladly she would have kissed the maester just then. His was the perfect solution. Benjen Stark was a sworn brother. Jon would be a son to him, the child he would never have, and in time the boy would take the oath as well. He would father no sons who might someday contest with Catelyn's own grandchildren for Winterfell. Maester Lewin said, There is a great honor in service on the wall, my lord, and even a bastard may rise high in the Night's Watch. Ned reflected. Still his voice was troubled. Jon is so young. If he asked this when he was a man grown, that would be one thing. But a boy of 14, a hard sacrifice, Master Lewin agreed. Yet these are hard times, my lord. His road is no crueler than yours or your lady's. Catelyn thought of the three children she must lose. It was not easy keeping silent then. Ned turned away from them to gaze out the window, his long face silent and thoughtful. Finally he sighed and turned back. Very well, he said to Maester Lewin. I suppose it is for the best. I will speak to Ben. When shall we tell Jon? The Maester asked. When I must. Preparations must be made. It will be a fortnight before we are ready to depart. I would sooner let Jon enjoy these last few days. Summer will end soon enough, and childhood as well. And when the time comes, I will tell him myself. Okay, so I really like this. A lot of what we can learn about just both Ned and Catelyn on this chapter. For example, you can learn that for something that you must know about Catelyn, and this is something that you will notice more and more as the books go on. She's first and foremost a mother. You know, that is something very important to her character, and you can also tell that she's kind of a bit paranoid, not quite paranoid, but she tends to be more on the superstitious side, on the paranoid side of things, because she believes, the whole idea of the antler of the stag, the stag's antler that killed the dire wolf, that was the mother of the puppies that they have now. So and not only that, but she's also you can tell that at the beginning she tells Ned that you need because the king might put them in danger if he says no, which there historically were kings who did that, but Robert is generally he's quick to anger, but he's not one to let's just go and kill people. Although he does enjoy war, as you will learn, but he never provokes it or anything. He just enjoys participating in it. Basically, that's that you can tell a lot from this. You can also tell, how Ned is. He can be a bit impatient at times, but overall, he seems to be. He seems to be kind of, at least from what I understand, he seems to be kind of stoic. But yeah, I really like this chapter. I think in here both Ned and Catelyn are around their mid-30s. So yeah, and yeah, that's it's a really cool chapter. Let's see. Next we have Arya. An Arya chapter. We have an Arya chapter. Which I mean, I guess I can read one more, and yeah, I guess I can read one more before we end the stream. Uh, mm, Although my voice is kind of my throat is kind of killing me trying to do the voices. Uh, but should I do one more? Let me see. 8-ish pages. It's about the same length as the last one. I think. Was that? Okay, let me see actually. 1, 2, 3. Now this other one was 10. This one is 6. So this was a bit shorter. Um, but actually, I think I'm actually gonna leave it there for tonight, and continue. My next reading stream. I'm not sure when it will be. This next week, the way it will work is I'll have three streams in Spanish and then 2 in English. So one of them will be a reading stream, the other one will be a Half-Life stream. I just need to work out the schedule, and yeah, that'll be the schedule for this upcoming week. I'm still have to completely decide on the dates, but I'll post it. I'll post it on the Google calendars tomorrow at most. You can also see it on my Twitch page in the About tab. There you can see my future streams, and yeah, that's yeah. I mean, that's about it for today. Thank you so much for coming. And again, I'm very sorry about Thursday, but at least I finally I got to reread the chapter, so all is cool now, and hopefully, yeah. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Even if you're just watching the VOD, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, thank you for coming, for being here, and I hope we. I hope you want to come. To the next ones. Also, if anyone speaks Spanish, you're more than welcome to join us. For the or join me, I guess. Still, which, but whatever. Join us for the Spanish streams. If they're appealing to you, I also will be reading and playing games on those, and from time to time just talking and whatever. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight, and as always, it was hot today, so you're welcome. And yeah, thank you. I hope I see you soon. And I really need to think of an outro or something. But anyways, thank you so much. And I'll see you, next stream. Thank you. Bye.